Elena Morales had always gotten what she wanted. At 32, she was the kind of woman who commanded attention when she entered a room. Sharp green eyes, auburn hair that caught the light just so, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. As the senior marketing director at Davidson and Associates, she was used to closing deals and getting her way. But James Crawford presented a different kind of challenge altogether. She first noticed him at the company's annual holiday party. While other husbands stood awkwardly by the punch bowl, looking bored and checking their phones, James was different. He moved through the crowd with an easy charm, his dark hair slightly tousled, wearing a navy suit that fit him perfectly. When he smiled, and God, what a smile, it reached his brown eyes in a way that made Elena's pulse quicken. "That's James Crawford," her assistant whispered when she caught Elena staring. "He's married to Victoria, the elementary school teacher. They've been together since college." Elena filed that information away, but she couldn't stop watching him. The way he listened intently when people spoke, how he threw his head back when he laughed, the protective way he placed his hand on his wife's lower back when they walked together. Victoria was pretty enough, Elena supposed. Blonde, petite, with a sweet smile that probably charmed her students. But she was so ordinary, safe, predictable. Elena introduced herself under the pretense of work, mentioning a potential marketing campaign that could benefit from James's architectural firm. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and she noticed how his eyes lingered on her lips when she spoke. When Victoria appeared at his side, Elena smoothly transitioned into the role of new friend. "Victoria, I've heard so much about you." Elena lied smoothly. "James tells me you teach third grade? How wonderful. I'd love to hear more about it sometime." Victoria's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Oh, I'd love that. Maybe we could grab coffee next week?" "Perfect." Elena smiled warmly while calculating her next move. Over the following weeks, Elena carefully cultivated both relationships. She became Victoria's newest confidant, listening to her complaints about James working late, about feeling disconnected, about the mundane struggles of marriage and motherhood, all while filing away every piece of information that could prove useful. With James, she was more subtle. Casual touches during meetings that lasted a fraction too long, text messages about work that arrived just late enough in the evening to feel intimate. Comments about being lonely in the city, about understanding the pressures of a demanding career. The breakthrough came during a client dinner in February. James had mentioned feeling overwhelmed, caught between a demanding project and Victoria's expectations at home. Elena saw her opening. "You know," she said, leaning closer across the dimly lit restaurant table, "sometimes we all need to escape. Just disappear for a weekend and remember who we are outside of all the obligations." James's eyes met hers, and she saw something shift, a flicker of desire, of possibility. "That sounds dangerous," he murmured. "The best things usually are," Elena replied, letting her fingers brush against his hand. "I know this place upstate. A little lakeside resort. Very discreet, very private." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Finally, James spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "When?" Elena's smile was triumphant, though she kept it carefully controlled. "Next weekend. You could tell Victoria it's a business conference. I'll handle all the arrangements." As they parted that evening, Elena felt a rush of victory. Phase 1 was complete. Soon, she would have everything she wanted, and Victoria would never see it coming. After all, who would suspect that her newest friend was systematically destroying her marriage from the inside out? The plan was perfect. Elena was certain nothing could go wrong. The Silverbrook Resort sat nestled against the pristine waters of Lake Harmony, 2 hours north of the city. Elena had chosen it carefully, exclusive enough to ensure privacy, romantic enough to set the perfect mood, and remote enough that running into anyone they knew would be impossible. or so she thought. James picked her up early Saturday morning, his hands trembling slightly as he loaded her weekend bag into his BMW. "Victoria thinks I'm at the Henderson Industries Conference in Albany," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Relax," Elena purred, sliding into the passenger seat. She wore a flowing sundress that hugged her curves perfectly, her hair loose and catching the morning light. "This is our time. No guilt, no obligations. Just us." The drive up was electric with tension. Elena kept her hand on James's thigh, feeling his muscles tense under her touch. She talked about everything except what they were really doing: the weather, a funny story from work, the beautiful scenery flashing past their windows. But her fingers traced lazy circles on his leg, and she caught him stealing glances at her whenever he thought she wasn't looking. Their suite at the resort was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, a private balcony, and a king-sized bed that seemed to dominate the room. Elena had specifically requested the romantic package, complete with champagne, chilling in an ice bucket and rose petals scattered across the pristine white linens. "Jesus, Elena," James breathed, setting down their bags. "This is perfect," she finished, moving close enough that he could smell her perfume, something exotic and intoxicating she'd chosen just for this weekend. "That's the idea." For a moment, they just looked at each other. The reality of what they were about to do hung in the air between them. Then Elena reached up and traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip. "Are you having second thoughts?" she whispered. Instead of answering, James pulled her against him, his mouth crashing down on hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry, months of suppressed desire finally unleashed. Elena melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal passion. They broke apart, both breathing heavily. "I've wanted this for so long," James confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," Elena smiled, leading him toward the windows. "But we have all weekend. Let me show you what you've been missing." They spent the afternoon exploring the resort grounds, walking hand in hand along the lakeshore. Elena had packed a picnic, lunch, and they found a secluded spot under a weeping willow where the water lapped gently at the rocky beach. As they ate strawberries and sipped wine, Elena felt a sense of complete satisfaction. This was exactly as she'd imagined it. "You're incredible," James said, watching her lean back against the tree, the dappled sunlight playing across her face. "I can't believe I'm here with you." "Believe it," Elena replied, pulling him down beside her. This time, when they kissed, it was slower, deeper. Elena's hands roamed over his chest, feeling his heart racing under her palms. When James's lips moved to her neck, she arched against him, a soft moan escaping her lips. "Not here," she whispered, though every fiber of her being wanted him to continue. "Tonight, in our room. I want our first time to be perfect." That evening, they dressed for dinner at the resort's elegant restaurant. Elena chose a black cocktail dress that left little to the imagination, while James looked devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit. As they were seated at their table, Elena noticed how the other women in the restaurant looked at him with obvious appreciation. "He's mine now," she thought with fierce satisfaction. "At least for this weekend." The dinner was exquisite. Perfectly. Prepared salmon, vintage wine, and chocolate dessert that they fed each other with intimate smiles. But Elena barely tasted any of it. All she could think about was getting James back to their room, of finally having him completely to herself. "This feels like a dream," James said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Like something that's too good to be real." Elena lifted their joined hands to her lips, pressing a soft kiss to his knuckles. "It's as real as you want it to be," she promised. "As real as we make it." As they finished their wine and prepared to leave for what they both knew would be a night of passion, Elena felt completely in control. Everything was going according to plan. Soon, James would be hers completely, and Victoria would be nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. She had no idea that 2 tables away, hidden behind a large fern and partially obscured by the dim lighting, Victoria's best friend Rachel sat with her husband, watching their every move with growing horror and disbelief. The restaurant at Silverbrook Resort hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. Soft jazz played in the background, and candles flickered on every table, creating an atmosphere of intimate romance. Elena felt like she was floating on air. She and James had just finished their main course, and the wine had left them both relaxed and giddy. James's tie was slightly loosened, his dark hair mussed from running his fingers through it, a nervous habit Elena found endearing. She felt beautiful and powerful, basking in the way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. "You know what I love about you?" Elena asked, leaning forward so that her voice was barely above a whisper. The movement caused her dress to shift, revealing more of her décolletage, and she saw James's eyes darken with desire. "Tell me," he said, his voice husky. "You make me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible," she said, reaching across the table to trace patterns on his hand with her fingernail, "like I'm not just going through the motions anymore." James captured her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a soft kiss to her palm. "I feel the same way. Being with you, it's like waking up from a very long sleep." Elena's heart raced at his words. This was it, the moment she'd been building toward for months. James was completely under her spell, and she felt drunk on the power of it. The wine had loosened her tongue and made her bold, reckless even. "James," she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "I need to ask you something." "Anything," he replied immediately, his brown eyes focused entirely on her face. Elena took a deep breath, feeling like she was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. But the weekend had been so perfect, so magical. Surely James felt the same connection she did. Surely he could see that what they had was worth fighting for. "When are you finally going to leave your wife for me?" she asked, her voice clear and confident despite the wine. The question hung in the air between them, bold and unashamed. Elena watched James's face for his reaction, expecting to see relief that she'd finally voiced what they were both thinking. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like panic flicker across his features before he quickly masked it. "Elena," he started, but she pressed on. "I know it's complicated," she said quickly, mistaking his hesitation for concern about logistics rather than the crushing realization of what she was actually asking. "But we could make it work. We're perfect together. You have to see that. This weekend proves it." James glanced around the restaurant nervously, as if suddenly remembering. They were in public. "Maybe we should talk about this back in the room," he said quietly. But Elena was too caught up in her own emotions to notice his discomfort. The wine, the romantic setting, the intoxicating feeling of having him all to herself, it all combined to make her feel invincible. "Why wait?" she laughed, her voice carrying further than she intended. "I love you, James, and I know you love me too. So what's stopping us from being together?" Really together? At a table just 2 rows behind them, partially hidden by a large potted fern and the restaurant's dim lighting, Rachel Morrison nearly choked on her wine. She'd been having a quiet anniversary dinner with her husband, David, when she'd noticed the familiar profile of someone she thought she recognized. It had taken her a few minutes to place him. James Crawford, married to her dear friend Victoria. At first, Rachel had assumed the woman with him must be a colleague or client. James worked in architecture, after all, and business dinners weren't uncommon. But as the evening progressed and she watched their body language, the intimate touches, the way they gazed into each other's eyes, the obvious chemistry crackling between them, the horrible truth became clear. And now, this. The brazen question that left no doubt about what was happening. "David," Rachel whispered urgently to her husband, who was obliviously working his way through his steak. "David, we need to leave. Now." "What? Why?" David looked confused. "We haven't even had dessert yet." But Rachel was already standing, her face pale with shock and anger. "I'll explain in the car," she hissed, grabbing her purse. As they hurried toward the exit, Rachel's mind raced. Victoria was home right now, probably grading papers or reading bedtime stories to their daughter Emma, completely unaware that her husband was at a romantic resort with another woman, a woman who apparently expected him to leave his family for her. Rachel's hands shook as she fumbled for her phone in the parking lot. She and Victoria had been friends since college. They'd been each other's bridesmaids, had supported each other through everything life had thrown at them. There was no question about where her loyalty lay. Back in the restaurant, Elena was still talking, her voice animated with dreams of their future together. James sat frozen, the full weight of his betrayal crashing down on him as he realized how far things had gone, and how very public their conversation had become. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, his wife would receive a phone call that would change everything forever. Rachel's hands trembled as she sat in the passenger seat of David's car, staring at her phone. The parking lot of Silverbrook Resort was dimly lit, and through the restaurant windows she could still see James and Elena at their table, completely absorbed in each other and oblivious to the fact that their secret was no longer safe. "You're sure it was him?" David asked quietly, though he'd seen the recognition and horror on his wife's face. In their 15 years of marriage, he'd never seen Rachel look so shaken. "Positive," Rachel whispered. "And the woman—" "God, David, she was asking when he was going to leave Victoria for her, like it was already decided, like Victoria and Emma don't even matter." David reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "What are you going to do?" Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the terrible knowledge settling on her shoulders. Victoria was her oldest friend, her college roommate, her daughter's godmother. They talked every day, shared everything. How could she not tell her about this? But how could she tell her? How do you destroy someone's entire world with a single phone call? "I have to tell her," Rachel finally said, her voice barely audible. "She's my best friend. She deserves to know the truth." Her finger hovered over Victoria's contact information. It was almost 9 o'clock. Victoria would be settling Emma down for the night, probably planning to spend the evening grading papers and waiting for James to call from his conference. The thought of Victoria's innocent trust made Rachel's stomach churn with anger. How dare James do this to her? How dare he lie so casually about a weekend affair while his wife held down the fort at home? She pressed call. The phone rang twice before Victoria's cheerful voice came through the speaker. "Rach, perfect timing. I just got Emma down and was about to make some tea. How was your anniversary dinner?" Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes. Victoria sounded so happy, so content. In 30 seconds, Rachel was going to shatter that peace. Forever. "Vic," Rachel began, then stopped, her throat closing up. "Rachel? What's wrong? You sound strange. There was no way to soften this blow, no way to make it hurt less." Rachel took a deep breath and forced the words out. "I'm at Silverbrook Resort with David, Victoria. James is here, with another woman." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Rachel could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she waited for Victoria's response. "What?" Victoria's voice was small, confused. "No, that's not possible. James is at a conference in Albany. He called me this morning from the hotel. Victoria, I'm looking right at them. They're having dinner together, and it's... God, Vic, it's clearly romantic. She's been touching him all evening, and they keep kissing, and she just asked..." Rachel's voice broke. "She asked when he was going to leave you for her." Another silence, longer this time. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was completely different, hollow, mechanical. You're absolutely sure it's James? Yes, Rachel whispered. I'm so sorry, Vic. I'm so sorry. 2 hours away, in the cozy kitchen of the home she'd shared with James for 8 years, Victoria Crawford felt her world tilt sideways. The mug of tea in her hands suddenly seemed impossibly heavy, and she set it down with shaking fingers. What do I do? She asked, the question barely a whisper. I don't know, honey. I don't know. But David and I are driving back to the city now. Do you want us to come over? No, Victoria said quickly. I need to think. I need to figure out what to say to Emma if she wakes up and asks where Daddy is. Emma, their 7-year-old daughter, who adored her father and still believed the world was a safe, predictable place where parents loved each other forever and promises meant something. Victoria. I have to go, Victoria interrupted. I need to be alone right now. She hung up the phone and sat in the sudden silence of her kitchen, staring at the cheerful yellow walls she'd painted last spring while James was at work. The walls that had witnessed countless family dinners, homework sessions, quiet conversations after Emma went to bed. The walls that had held their life together. Upstairs, James's side of the bed was neatly made, his pillow still indented from where he'd slept last night before getting up early to pack for his conference. His coffee mug was still in the sink from this morning, along with the plate from the toast he'd made before kissing her goodbye. Had he already been planning this then? Had he kissed her knowing he was about to spend the weekend with another woman? Victoria's phone rang again, a text message from James himself. Conference is going well. Miss you both. We'll call tomorrow. Night. Love you. She stared at the message until the words blurred together, her hands shaking with a rage she'd never experienced before. Love you. While he was having a romantic dinner with another woman who expected him to leave his family. For her. Victoria had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over and gave people the benefit of the doubt. But as she sat alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of everything she'd believed about her marriage, she felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. By the time James returned from his weekend of betrayal, she would be ready for him. Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear at Silverbrook Resort. Elena woke up wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets, her body still humming with satisfaction from the night before. James lay beside her, one arm thrown over his eyes against the early sunlight streaming through the windows. It had been everything she'd dreamed of and more. James had been passionate, tender, completely devoted to her pleasure. They'd made love twice, the second time slow and languid in the early hours of dawn, and Elena felt like she was glowing from the inside out. Good morning, handsome, she murmured, pressing kisses along his shoulder. James stirred, then pulled her against him, nuzzling her neck. Morning, beautiful. Sleep well? Elena purred, running her fingers through his chest hair. Best sleep of my life. Though we didn't get much of it. They made love again, soft and sweet in the morning light, and Elena felt like she could stay in this bed forever. This was what happiness felt like. Being wanted, being chosen, being loved by a man who made her feel like the most important person in the world. After room service breakfast, strawberries and champagne, because why not, they reluctantly began to pack. The real world was calling, and James had promised Victoria he'd be home by evening. I don't want this to end, Elena said, watching him fold his shirts with the same careful precision he brought to everything. This weekend has been perfect. It has, James agreed, but something in his voice made Elena look up sharply. He seemed distracted, almost melancholy, and a small knot of anxiety formed in her stomach. You're not having regrets, are you? She asked, trying to keep her tone light. James paused in his packing, meeting her eyes in the mirror. No regrets about this weekend, he said carefully. But Elena, we need to talk about what happens next. Elena's heart leaped. This was it. The conversation about their future, about when he would leave Victoria. Of course, I know it's complicated, but it's more than complicated. James interrupted gently. Elena, I care about you. This weekend has been incredible. But I have a daughter. I have responsibilities. The anxiety in Elena's chest bloomed into something, closer to panic. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we got carried away last night, with the wine, the romantic setting. Maybe we said things we didn't really mean. Elena stared at him, feeling like he'd slapped her. I meant every word I said to you. Did you lie to me? I didn't lie, James said, running his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture that had seemed so endearing yesterday. But I think we need to slow down. Take some time to think about this rationally. Rationally? Elena's voice rose dangerously. There's nothing rational about love, James. You can't just turn it on and off like a faucet. They argued all the way back to the city, Elena growing more desperate and James more withdrawn with each passing mile. By the time he dropped her off at her apartment, Elena felt like she was losing her mind. I'll call you, James said, but his voice was hollow, and Elena knew with sinking certainty that he wouldn't. This isn't over, she told him, her voice fierce with determination. What we have doesn't just disappear because you're scared. But as she watched him drive away, Elena felt the first cracks forming in her perfect fantasy. 2 hours later, James pulled into his own driveway, expecting to find his house dark and peaceful. Instead, every light was on, and Victoria's car was parked at an odd angle as if she'd been in a hurry. He found her in the living room, sitting in his favorite chair with her hands folded in her lap. She'd clearly been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen, but her voice was perfectly steady when she spoke. How was the conference, James? Something in her tone made his blood run cold. It was fine. Good sessions, networking opportunities. You know how these things are. Actually, I don't, Victoria said, standing up slowly. Because according to my friend Rachel, who was having dinner at the Silverbrook Resort last night, you were there with another woman. A woman who seems to think you're going to leave Emma and me for her? The world tilted sideways. James felt like he was going to be sick, like the ground was opening up beneath his feet. Victoria, I can explain. Can you? Victoria's voice was ice cold. Can you explain how you lied to my face this morning? How you kissed me goodbye and told me you loved me while you were planning to spend the weekend fucking another woman? James had never heard his wife use that kind of language. In 8 years of marriage, through arguments and stress and difficult times, Victoria had never spoken with such controlled fury. Please, he began, but Victoria held up her hand. I've packed a bag for you, she said. It's by the front door. I want you out of this house tonight. You can't keep me from Emma. Emma is spending the night at my sister's house. She thinks Daddy had to go on another business trip. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to destroy her entire world by telling her the truth. But that's not your decision anymore. James stared at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in months, and saw a stranger. This wasn't the sweet, accommodating woman he'd married. This was someone harder, colder, someone he'd created with his betrayal. Victoria, please, it was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. It meant something to her, Victoria interrupted. And if it didn't mean anything to you, that makes it worse, not better. As James gathered his things and prepared to leave the only home he'd known for years, Elena was discovering that secrets have a way of spreading like wildfire. Her phone had been buzzing all evening with calls and texts from colleagues who had somehow heard rumors about her weekend away with a married man. By Monday morning, everyone at Davidson and Associates knew about the affair, and Elena found herself facing a professional nightmare to match her personal one. James never did call her back. Within a month, he was begging Victoria for forgiveness while living in a studio apartment downtown, fighting for supervised visits with his daughter. Elena, meanwhile, had been quietly asked to find employment. Elsewhere, her reputation in their industry utterly destroyed. The weekend that was supposed to be a perfect secret had become a cautionary tale, whispered about at office parties and coffee shops across the city. Elena had gotten exactly what she'd wanted, James all to herself. She just hadn't counted on how quickly everything else would crumble around them, or how empty victory could feel when it came at such a devastating price. Victoria, meanwhile, was learning to rebuild her life one day at a time, stronger and more independent than she'd ever imagined she could be. Some betrayals, she discovered, set you free in ways you never expected.